So, yeah, do you want to start?
Just a small introduction. So I'm Thiago from Working. Like I said in the morning, we are a co-working space or a shared and flexible office. And we start this business 1 year ago, just 1 year ago. We are very young, but we have a dynamic team, and we start this with the goal of creating a community where you can share your ideas, meet people with the same interests, generate and create synergies between people and companies among people, and that's our main goal here. And that's why we chose Mario and DeNites to do this kind of events here. This is what we are looking for. In the building, we have three spaces: one on the top floor, one on the first floor, and this one that we are here. We're supposed to have this talk inside our mini auditorium, but we are too many to do that. We thought that we're gonna have like half of the people, but this was a last minute call to do the talking here. And if it's transparent, we have like 2,000 square meters of offices, around 30 companies and 270 users using our space. But I will leave this tomorrow. Maybe we have a surprise to share with you, because we have probably a new space and related to the Web3 ecosystem. And I just want to thank you all, your presence here. We're really glad to have you all here. And so thank you and enjoy. But I don't know, we have a networking section, not a networking session,
Yes,
with some drinks afterwards. But Mario will talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So, my name is Mario. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Taikai. Taikai is the host of this event. So, if anyone doesn't know what Taikai does, in a nutshell, we do hackathons and conferences. So we're a platform that does that. We want to scale our vision, but if you Google us, you'll find out more about what we do. So, I'm here to actually speak about DeNites. So DeNites started last year as kind of a movement from Web3 founders. We felt like we should leave an impression when people come from outside of Portugal and visit us, like to Web Summit or to Live Lisbon or to other Web3 conferences out there, to get to know the ecosystem and what we do. So we started by doing that, and it was kind of like after parties of main events, and we started to evolve this model to actually bring more educational material as we're having here, like talks, workshops. That's our ambition for this season that just started with this event, and also co-working sessions, because I believe it's also important for people to get to know each other, work together, etc. So this is like the motto of the season 2. Again, starting with DeNites Porto here. There were already some events in Braga that will probably happen in Braga as well. Nuno from Subvisual is the one that is hosting those, if you want to talk about that. And there's also 2 other guys that are part of the leadership team of DeNites DAO, and they're based in Lisbon and doing events in Lisbon as well. So the idea is, as I mentioned, to turn this into a DAO, make it collaborative, make it easy for anyone that wants to host DeNites events. And I would say that our biggest event planned for this season is going to be DeNites Week. So DeNites Week is going to be a set of co-working sessions, talks, parties, and some other stuff that we will include that will happen during ETH Lisbon, Web Summit, and all of these days, like the blockchain month in Lisbon, that is going to be end of October, beginning of November. So this is like in a nutshell what DeNites is. I hope you enjoy this session, but before jumping into that, so speaking about the little surprise that Thiago had, I actually gave a teaser today, this morning. Personally, I've been in this space long enough to know that there is a true community here in Porto. I actually want to make sure that it grows. So Thiago offered me an opportunity to build something that I believe is quite relevant for the space, which is to create a physical space, so a crypto hub in Porto here in Working. So we're going to yeah, on the top floor. So we're going to have it real soon, and so if you're interested in knowing more, just speak to us, our team, or Tiago's team, and we can guide you and we can sign you up for the wait list and all of that. So this is like the biggest surprise. I'm sure that we'll all benefit of having a physical space because it's where the connections happen more frequently and be able. So enough talking. I know you're excited to hear about our panelists today. So let's move on with the main topic, which is DAOs. So that's the main topic of the discussion today.
Is the top floor going to be a DAO, or?
It might be. It might be.
I'm trying to buy the NFT right now.
We can discuss that.
Yes. So starting by introducing people here. So Hugo on my left will be the moderator. Is a secretary at Institute New Economy. Then we have on my right Ines Silva, which is a contributor for Athena DAO. You probably know her also for Women in Tech and some other movements that Ines is involved. Ines is quite active in the tech space and now in the Web3 space, mostly design. I know that she probably will engage with that later on. So Ines introduced. Now Paulo Fonseca. Paulo Fonseca is a designer. That's the best way to describe it, right?
Yes.
A designer that designs designers, more or less, right? He's been quite active in the space for quite some time. My first workshop into this space was actually done by Paulo and another colleague of his back in 2017, I believe. So yeah, over there in Matzink. And Paulo is now working on RNDAO, is how it's pronounced, right?
Yep.
R&D? RNDAO?
RNDAO, research and DAO,
Okay,
shit.
And now focus on research. And last but not least, we have Carlos. Not sure if I can pronounce his
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Let's leave it at that. It's anonymous, anonymous focus. And so Carlos is part of a big DeFi project called Lido Finance, which is also DAO. So my objective for today was to bring people that actually know how to build and contribute to DAOs. And I'll stop talking now and I'll leave the floor.
Just one thing, Mario, sorry. We have some bracelets to drinks and food outside. So Tomas have the bracelet, so you need to put the one just to have drinks.
Yeah. So at the end of the talk, make sure you go to Tomas. Yeah. He has food and drinks on his hand, so I know that everyone will want that. Yeah. Basically, that's it. Right?
Thank you and enjoy.
All right. Enjoy.
I'll just shift a bit. I'm not showing you my back. Very well. Thanks for the introduction, everyone. My name is Hugo, as Mario said, and together with some other crypto associations in Portugal, I work trying to make our country more favorable for the industry. So basically doing policy and trying to influence the government and other stakeholders to ensure they don't fuck up the nice ecosystem they have by chance created. And in that regard, I just ran from an interesting meeting in Lisbon. Hope to have news on that soon. That's why I'm dressed so seriously today. I apologize for that. I didn't bring my traditional black t-shirt, as you can see. And given that Mario provided already with some nice introductions, and before passing the ball to our dear panelists, I just wanted to understand here through a show of hands of who in the room will know how to define a DAO. Okay, who in the room knows what a DAO is? Does it need to be the philosophical question of how to define a DAO? Okay, so The ends are a bit shy, but I reckon that 2/3, even Barbara, they're impressed. So starting with that question, and this is out of the script, but that's the way this should go. Before having a chance to deep dive into some of the topics that you are experts in, what I'd like to know from each of you would be, in less than a minute, so in a nutshell, a couple of words or even a single word. How would you define a DAO so that we are able to see the different perspectives and the different angles of this very complex topic? Because everyone will have an interesting take on that. DAO could be just an association, could be just an informal group of friends who have dinner every month to rank the best franchising in Porto. It could be a football club, informal or professional. But in the minds of our dear panelists, who is the first one to take these bullets, to bite these bullets?
I'm happy to do it. So,
just because you're Anna.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, I'd say a couple common things across all of the different examples that you guys. And I'll go more on the actual more technical side of what an actual DAO can be. I'd say some common things to each different DAO is that there's basically an on-chain treasury. So there's an address, normally called the wallet, where there are funds, normally governance tokens for that DAO or any other types of funds, including dollars in the form of stablecoins or other types of assets there. That treasury is normally managed by governance, and that's actually the main role of a DAO, as we'll go over later today. But there's basically on-chain voting, where people have governance rights over that address, and that address can go much beyond just having capital. So it can also have a lot of permissions to interact with many different smart contracts in different ways. And so basically, people that are participants or stakeholders in that DAO, via holding the governance tokens, have power in the decisions that it makes. I'd say that's the most bare bones definition in terms of things that are actually needed to be a DAO. But then you can take this in multiple different ways in terms of finance, what I do, in terms of many other areas. So I think that's the most bare bone things that DAO needs to exist.
That's quite a sophisticated definition already. The most bare bones definition is just the acronym, the decentralized autonomous organization.
Totally.
But perhaps Inez and Paulo, what would be the meaning of autonomous in that sense of the definition?
Yeah, I can go. I think like instead of answering directly your question, I think like when I start looking at DAOs, actually a lot of things came to my mind. I felt like some of the things were things that we were already talking before. Like if you ever read Reinvented Organizations, where they talk about like new kinds of organizations, they talk about like being decentralized, where people can actually make decisions and contribute to the whole and the purpose of the organization. If you look at, like, for example, there's a really nice book that I read like maybe 10 years ago called Maverick from Ricardo Sandler. It talks about how he had this company and then he made sure that it was autonomous, like where people could actually be like more than employers to a bigger chain. They would actually be able to make decisions, be part of those decisions, and have the autonomy to do exactly what they wanted to do, more or less what they wanted to do. And so when I started like seeing the DAO, like the emergence of DAOs, I felt like, okay, this is taking it to a new level. It's making sure that a lot of like what was a dream back then, that was like one day we will be able to not only work for these leaders, we'll actually be, or these CEOs or whatever, like we'll be able to actually be part of something bigger and be actually a more active contributor to that. But now we can do it in a scale that before wasn't possible. And I think what DAOs with the technology and blockchain actually brings is that the scale that before was completely impossible. And then like when you mentioned like I can be an association, can be a group of friends, that's true. But at the same time, we can go actually much beyond that. And I think that's actually my appeal to like what these organizations can do.
Definitely agree, but there's a topic that I believe Paul will for sure have to touch, which is on the autonomous part. It's not only about autonomy, but specifically about the power of smart contracts to, as much as possible, automate some of the actions of the organization. Is that correct, Paulo? And how would you give your nutshell definition of a DAO as well?
In R&D, we did a research project and we published a What's a DAO report that you can Google and read. But you had the technical definition, the organizational perspective of the definition. I'm going to try to give you some other type of definition that I call the philosophical definition. So to me, DAOs are to organizations as democracy was to monarchy.
Can you repeat that? So that
DAOs are to organizations as democracy was to monarchy.
just writing philosophical.
Because the whole thing about DAOs is that this is an idea that we can organize ourselves around in a new way. And we used to live under a monarch that would dictate everything in those days, right? And then someone was like, oh shit, this is tyrannical. Maybe we should change this. Equality, fraternity, liberty. Lady, topless in France. And then eventually democracy came. And maybe it's a better system. There's some crazy people out there that still say that monarchy is a better system. But and I see that corporations today can be tyrannical as well. And maybe DAOs are the way to make it more democratic.
Very profound. Just allowing a little pause here so not everyone absorbs.
And the autonomous part of it doesn't really matter, as long as we agree on the rules that we should govern ourselves to. And then after we agree on the rules, sure, smart contracts and code can automatize all of that, and everything runs smoothly. But first we need to agree how to govern ourselves. And that's the other part.
Yeah. I've always appreciated how DAOs suddenly made cool topics like governance to teenagers. Oh, suddenly I'm very concerned how to improve voter turnout, not just the 19 years old managing some DeFi project over a DAO. Very well. So thank you for these very interesting definitions. I think they have definitely laid the ground for the second part of our conversation. Some very crucial topics to the future of DAOs and to understanding whether or not DAOs are the future of organizations. We'll get back to them. Before that, let's just dig a little bit deeper on your own expertise of DAOs. And we'll start with Dinesh, which as a contributor to Athena DAO, a decentralized science project, has a very unique take on what I would say is perhaps one of the purest representations of DAOs these days. So, for example, while we have Carlos over there representing the evil side of DAOs, the financial side of DAOs, just trying to escape the law and the regulation by having this magical thing called governance on chain, and we don't care about code of normal legal societies and stuff like that. On the decentralized science movement, we have some hope that humanity is not lost, perhaps. But I wanted to know a little bit more about that and whether this view is too naive or not, and whether the DeSci movement really has the power to improve the way we fund science instead of just like waiting for the government to invest in science or waiting for Elon Musk to invest in science.
I'm not sure if everyone is actually aware of what DeSci is. Like DeSci is decentralized science, and it comes from open science. So if you are like a researcher, the way it works right now is like you have to get funding to do your research. That funding requires that you actually apply for grants. Grants come either from public or private organizations, and you spend maybe more than 50% of your time actually writing grants, and then the other 50% of your time actually doing the research. But then if you want to keep on growing your career, you have to publish papers in scientific journals that the only actually job is curation. And basically what they do is like you apply, so like I have this paper on a specific thing, you send it to them, and then they say like, oh, okay, we are going to publish, but for you to publish, you need to pay X amount of dollars. And then for me to access it, I have to pay the journal X amount of dollars. And so basically there is I actually realized that the best business in the world is it's journals, scientific journals, because it's just like you ask researchers to be the editors for free. You ask researchers to be the reviewers for free. You basically you have researchers pay you to publish their articles, and then you have researchers and students pay you to read the articles. So that's the situation. So that led to some projects being created over the years to actually. So one of the most important ones is SciHub, where you can go and you have the research papers there for free, but that's against the law, and they are always changing jurisdiction and the domain because like they have it's not allowed. But that led to like the open science, and then more recently to decide to try to understand not only how to fund, but go beyond that. How can we actually build tools that allow researchers to do their best job, but also create some guidelines like, for example, one of the biggest problems of science is being able to replicate results. There is like, I think once I actually saw something this week that there were like math science papers where they could not replicate 50% of the results. And that goes to in biology, in health, and all those areas, which means that a lot of things that we read saying like caffeine is good for you or alcohol is bad, the next day you read exactly the opposite and you don't know exactly what's true. And the reason is because like there's no one actually seeing if the thing is good or bad, or like to see if what people are saying is actually true. So with this side, what happened was like a group of people started to organize to, on one hand, fund research, and one of the first DAOs doing that was Vita DAO. So Vita DAO is a DAO that was created to fund longevity research, and that's what like over the past year they have funded 15 projects across the world, and to do that as a DAO, they rely on a technology developed by Molecule that is the IP and NFT. So basically, they turn IP, so intellectual property, from some kind like a patent or some kind of intellectual property in an NFT that then Vita DAO can actually buy and invest in. So, but then there are like, you have like DeSci Labs, for example. I really recommend that you check what they are doing, because what they try to do is like to reveal the scientific paper or the scientific journal, where when you go there and you have a paper, you can not only see the paper, but you can actually see a lot of metadata around that paper. You can actually see the data that paper used to get those results. So that's a good example. Again, not funding science, but in this case actually making the process easier. And there's like a lot of them. So every month I have a call with like more or less like 15 projects that are working in this space. You have Research Hub, for example, that wants to be a new kind of place for people to discuss the science. You have Ants Review that is actually doing a lot of innovating a lot of like ways to do reviewing. And I'm also working in a smart contract research forum that we have a project around peer review, where we try to experiment with new incentives, like how can we incentivize researchers to do peer review in a different way than they are, right? Like right now they don't actually have any incentive, but how can we actually build something around that? So this is the space. And this year I went to Berlin and I met a group of women in DeSci Berlin, and then we realized that we all felt more or less the same issue, or we were at least aware of the same issue. That was women's health research is completely underfunded. Femtech companies are very underfunded, and so we thought about like why don't we come together, create a DAO that invests in research, women's health and women's reproductive health research and drug discovery. And so basically what we have been doing is working on the science side, but also on the investment part to basically build a DAO that will allow us to do that. Yeah, and I think that's it.
Cool. So combining the power of incentives and the ability to collaborate.
Yeah, I think like in our case we have I would say like two different focus. On one hand, we have of course the investment side. So we want to, as you mentioned, like create incentives, but also bring women together to fund the research on topics that actually we care about. And that's of course is a big challenge, because if you look at Web3, we still like the percentage of women working in Web3 is actually very low. So we need to onboard more women to the space and then be able to actually gather so we can invest there. But then we also have a second area that is like more the community. So right now we are thinking about like launching a membership NFT. So because like when we bring these women together, we all have our own health related stories. We all have experienced how badly we were treated or how our problems are not taken in consideration like as others are. And so like the fact that we can come together and can learn from each other, I think that's a lot of value. In our, right now, if you go on our Discord, you have like researchers, you have clinicians, you have physicians that bring that science part, but we also have investors, Web3 enthusiasts, and operators that are also looking for that part, that like that knowledge, that peer-to-peer collaboration and support, and that's why we are also seeing this in these two ways.
Right. So, Carver, sorry for putting you in the spotlight before. We'll shift a little bit to your side, but you'll have your chance of defense now. But before that, the second question to the audience, because I forgot to ask before, not only who knew what the DAO was, but who here is part of a DAO. And it doesn't count if you are part of something on Telegram that just adds DAO to the end of the Telegram channel. So here is part of the DAO. 4 or 5 people, just 5, 6.
We count DeNites as DAO now.
It's a very like emergent DAO for sure. Yeah. And it doesn't say DAO on the Telegram channel. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's renaming it right now.
So yeah, good to know. We hope that number increases as also the tools and the infrastructure for DAO gets better and easier to use, because it's still not easy to make a DAO and organize people in the DAO, but it's also not easy to go and make an association ahora. It seems easy. It's not in ahora for sure.
It's easier than the DAO, much easier actually.
Yeah, kind of. But so back to the financial side of DAOs, which was where DAOs were born, back with the original DAO, which was ACAD, and then created the first major Ethereum fork, and then was charged by the SEC for securities fraud. But not to say that Lido is potentially a subject of the wrath of the regulators soon, but tell us a little bit more about why is Lido a DAO, what are the benefits of being a DAO, how will you compare this financial part of the DAO side with the rest of the evolving landscape of DAOs?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question, because a lot of times when we're working in areas that receive a lot of hype and a lot of attention, there's a natural tendency into thinking that these are one-size-fits-all solutions, so that everything should be a DAO, every company should become a DAO, and stuff like that. Especially during bull markets where everyone is making money, everyone is kind of right in terms of the results that they're getting from the things that they're doing. And so one thing that I always try to do is questioning myself on stuff like this, to try to think about, from first principles, why should the place that I'm contributing to be a DAO instead of an LLC or any other type of non-profit or for-profit company? And there are actually good reasons for that, which is great, because otherwise it would just be a sandcastle, right, where it was just something that was built on hype. And the reason is that, can I also make a poll of the audience? So who here is familiar with DeFi in general, so decentralized finance? Perfect. So basically, I think one of the first areas where DAOs actually got product market fit, so where they actually are delivering more value than other traditional forms of organizations, is actually in decentralized finance, in DeFi, where we basically have protocols which have financial products, for example, an exchange or a money market where you can borrow and lend assets, or in our case, a liquid staking protocol at Lido, where the best way, in my opinion, to govern a protocol like that is actually via DAO for very specific reasons. So basically, a DeFi protocol is simply a set of smart contracts that live on a blockchain, in our case, on Ethereum mostly. And those smart contracts sometimes have to be governed. And this is like the key thing, where ideally the promise and the vision for decentralized finance is that we could have financial infrastructure, so DeFi contracts on some given blockchain, where they wouldn't need to be governed at all. So they would just work 24/7 without any human action on them. And that is actually the case on a few contracts. For example, on Uniswap, the contracts are completely hands-off in terms of the team not having control over changing them. And that has multiple benefits. And to govern one of those contracts, if it was fully hands-off from humans, there wouldn't be a need for a DAO. It could just live on chain, and just people using them for the actual product that they were delivering. But then there are multiple situations where we actually need to govern a few parameters for them. And Lido is a case of that, and many others are a case. For example, who here is familiar with Aave, for example, a money market on Ethereum? So basically, Aave is a place where you can borrow and lend different tokens, and there are parameters that have to receive human input in order to be chosen or altered. And those are, for example, risk factors, collateral factors. So how much can you borrow with this given as collateral? Basically, percentages like those. And those have to be calculated by humans or even by software, but they change over time, right? And if it changes over time, there's the need for governance, what we're talking about, for people to vote on that and to decide how it will change. And in Lido's case, that's actually the case as well, because when Lido was created, it was pre-merge, which was something that happened last week. So the Ethereum beacon chain that was proof of stake merged with the main chain, and now Ethereum is fully proof of stake, but before it wasn't. But there was also still the beacon chain, basically the place where you could stake ETH, already live when Lido launched. And so because there was all of that uncertainty, and because there are other parameters that need to be governed by people, for example, the set of validators, which are basically companies running nodes professionally and doing that on the behalf of Lido. Because of all of that human management, there needs to be decisions by people, by DAO contributors and DAO stakeholders, the people that hold LDO, the governance token, to sometimes vote on those decisions. And basically, when we have a financial smart contract that has some parameters that need to change over time, we basically need a DAO and the governance system attached to it to actually govern that. The reason this couldn't be done in a company, and going back to the question, is that there are very crucial benefits, and in Lido's case even more so, of having this happen on-chain, transparently, and without requiring additional trust assumptions. So for example, Lido, also who here is familiar with Lido? Awesome. So it's basically the #1 protocol for liquid staking, so people that want to stake their assets but keep liquidity on them instead of locking them up. Now Lido controls 30% of all of the stake ETH that's staked overall, and that's a centralization threat to Ethereum itself, and puts a lot of other stuff in harm's way if there were bad governance decisions at Lido. And if it was a company, there would be, first of all, no transparency around how those decisions were made, while in this case there's full transparency because it's all on-chain. It's all via the normal process, so it's basically first a governance forum, then a snapshot vote, and then an on-chain vote, and everyone can look into that, and everyone can look into who voted for what were the rationales behind each one of those votes, what were the descriptions initially, all of that. And then I would say the key thing is that the trust assumptions are much further reduced. So basically, Lido holders, LDO holders, have a certain set of powers that they can enact in terms of governing the Lido protocol, and that's not unlimited. It's a very specific set of powers and things that they can change. And if it was a centralized company having control individually over these smart contracts, basically people would not be able to stake their ETH there because they would not be able to trust a centralized company that would just be called upon to do something shady or even be moved by selfish interests of the founders, of the people that had that access to making smart contract changes there. And so it's actually a case, in my view, and of course, I'm just a guy that's interested in DeFi, so my view is worth what it's worth. So there are opposing views, and it's not obviously the end all be all. But in my view, as someone that's interested in DeFi, DAOs actually provide additional product benefits to DeFi and make DeFi protocols better than if they were governed any other way. And that's the kind of thing that excites me, where we actually see tech innovation actually deliver value, independently of the hype, independently of whatever may be happening in this space.
Super cool answer. Thanks for that. So earlier on, we got the power of incentives from Ines. Then Paul was talking about the power of the people regarding to restoring the demos out of the moment.
Maybe.
And you give us the resiliency aspect as opposed to the efficiency of centralized organizations. Yeah. And should we buy LDO or it's just governance token?
I have no investment advice for anyone, so.
First poll to the audience. Anyone here got the Uniswap airdrop? Yeah. Good that you don't show your age, so that we don't report it to the tax authorities. Cool. Just checking. Filling the room. So, Paulo, back to you. As a designer and a modern scholar of DAOs, you know more than anyone the importance of having these solid governance mechanisms to make sure that DAOs work nicely. But governance is boring. We don't want to talk about that. But you're also quite curious about community. As I told you earlier, I went on your Twitter account, I spied what we were doing, and you were sharing your love for an obscure book from a very controversial Portuguese figure that wrote this book on community, similar to the Sandbox on Community Manifesto, actually. And because Tiago and Mario, and not only because of that, but curious that Tiago and Mario are also talking about the fluffy side of community, and we want to create a crypto community. And fortunately, I think we are seeing that nicely emerging in Porto in a very natural and organic way. But I wanted to get your take on the uniqueness of community within DAOs. Is there something unique about it? Or are there specific problems to community on DAOs that perhaps arise because of the way government is structured? And can you share us a little bit more about your take on this very key, crucial topic?
Governance is boring until someone steals something from you.
Then it's painful.
Then you start like, oh shit, Besh stole my money. So people can either choose to let other people decide how the governance system should work, or they can start to design that system themselves. The problem is that when they attempt to design a governance system for themselves, and everybody has the same say on the matter, nobody gets along, right? No, there's no recipe that comes out of that. And DAOs are a bit like that. There are a bunch of people in DAOs trying to decide how they should govern themselves, and coming up with these amazing, crazy, convoluted, complex, stupid, illegal ways of doing it. And that's actually the promise of DAOs, is because now that we have this space where we can experiment with this. And some people govern themselves in this way, some other people govern themselves in this way. And the way they group themselves is usually because they belong to some kind of community. So the idea is that it's kind of like, I hope every one of us has a family here, and we need to manage our family within our, family peers, family members, and we argue and we fight and we have to split assets sometimes, and we have to do all those things. It's exactly the same thing. And actually, the book is called Community because it's portraying the author's family in that book. And
Sharing the same bed, literally.
Sharing the same bed, literally. Yeah. By the way, the book is amazing. Some people say, like Sadman has said, that it's the best thing that was ever written in Portuguese, so I recommend everybody to check it out. And it's only like 20 pages long. It's really amazing. But besides that, some people say that DAOs are communities with a bank account. So families with bank accounts, with a shared bank account. So that's kind of the same challenge. Imagine that you have a shared bank account with all your family members, with your brothers, your fathers and sisters and daughters and sons, and you all had to play along nicely so that you could do stuff together and decide on what to spend money or not, so on, what to buy, what to sell. So just imagine the kind of challenge. So just in your own family, that's like, fuck, right? So now imagine with a group of strangers in the internet that you don't know, most of them under a pseudonymous avatar that looks like a monkey, and trying to do that. So that's a challenge. That's what you're trying to do in DAOs. But what sets the boundary between one DAO and the other DAO is the community. Is the mission that that group of people wants to fulfill because they have the same mission and they consider themselves part of those communities. And this could be a small community of 5 friends that want to organize a dinner or a trip or a party together, or larger group of people that wants to build something, or an even larger group of people that wants to create a nation state on the internet. And DAOs theoretically will be able to empower that. So the way I recommend people to get into DAOs, given that almost nobody here is part of a DAO, is to start from community. Is to think about what are the things that are important to you, like for example, women's reproductive health, and find your own tribe and see if there's a tribe already. If not, create your own, and then join that tribe, and then try to not kill each other while we're trying to decide to govern ourselves. That's kind of the recipe to engage with us.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Because I think like the analogy of a family, I think is good on one hand, but bad on the other one. And I think the reason is because you are just part of one family, and in DAOs you can be at least part of the 100 discords, and you have to feel like you are part of a DAO or a community, and then you realize that it's impossible for you to follow all the conversations that are happening. And I think another way that I think in the family somehow you know where is your place. You know, like more or less like what's happening. I think in DAOs you don't. So you just get there, like you knock on the door and you open the door. It's like a carnival. And then you say like, now you have to understand like where you should go, what you should do. And then you are asked to contribute because everywhere is like, you have to contribute to the DAO. But then you say like, but what does that mean? And how can I contribute? So actually I spent a lot of time this year talking about the path to contribution, like how can I make sure that when I get somewhere where people arrive to a DAO, they know exactly what's expected or less expected from them, and of course like they can take that and go wherever they want to go, but at the same time I know that there's a lot of barriers for anyone that wants to join a DAO to actually understand like, okay, so where can I actually bring my skill, my skills. And of course, if you are a Solidity developer, there's plenty of places where you can contribute. But if you are like me, like with like more like marketing, communication, project management, community management background, it's much harder for me to actually understand like where can I add value. And I think that's again a different way of looking at families, because in families more or less we know what is expected.
Yeah, you're right. Let me just add something. The journey of getting into a DAO and contributing to the DAO is a clusterfuck in most places. The reason why it is because all DAOs are like, hey, please join and work for free. And then we'll see. That's basically the pitch. Please join, contribute, maybe you'll get paid, maybe you don't know. And I actually think DAOs are doing that wrong. I think DAOs should be like, hey, come on in, this is my house, this is my party, you're welcome in my party. Are you hungry? Hey, have some food. Are you thirsty? Hey, have some drinks.
A little bit like the DeNites system.
Exactly, you got more food. Exactly. And then you should go like, oh, by the way, what can you do? What can you produce? What can you contribute to? Okay, now we have this part of the house where you can do that. And I think DAOs are still very much on the mindset of like, we just need to get people in for them to contribute so that we can have a workforce for free for a bit, and then eventually pay them somehow in still undefined and unpredictable ways. And I think that comes from the mindset of we need to get rich, so let's get the community around this. Let's make them work for free. Let's make them buy our token, and we educate the community like that. And we that created the DAO, we get rich, which is not the way.
Can I add?
Of course, this is the topic.
Yeah, awesome. I have kind of a different view here in this last topic, which is that I think that a lot of people that work in crypto in spaces like these are very philosophically driven by meritocracy and values such as those. Sure. And I think that, for example, a lot of people in DeFi and in other places inside of crypto work pseudonymously online, and I'm one of those cases. And at least in my case, the main reason for that is that I want my results to speak for themselves instead of my background or where did I study or what did I do before or my age. And so I think that it's reasonable for people that come into a new DAO, especially if it's a very established protocol in our case, or a very established project or a very large DAO, to just start contributing for free and starting to add value for free. I know that's hard. I did it in the beginning and it was hard. But I think that's actually a very decent way to get onboarded, because from that point on, you're basically just talking and just being evaluated on your results and the things that you actually were able to do. So I think that's even superior than a normal recruiting process because I have recruited people before to other organizations, and I think that there's always a mismatch inherent to people that can be very good at interviews and pitch their background super well, but then have a divergence between that and how well they actually work and how well they actually contribute to the company, that whatever. And so I think that actually having some proven results before actually being paid is kind of a reasonable expectation for people that want to go into one of these largest projects. For example, that at Lido, like a lot of people in DeFi would like to work in a protocol like Lido, right? Because it has a $2 billion market cap. It's one of the most important protocols for Ethereum, in my opinion, and there are super interesting problems to solve there. And so one of the main ways people actually get onboarded to Lido is just that they start contributing for free, either in governance or community management, marketing, or even in tech itself. And then people notice them because from that point on, it's just a conversation about what they actually produce instead of what they're saying they will produce, right? And so it's a much easier ask to be onboarded or to just be onboarded after you actually have proven that you're good at doing something. So I understand that a lot of people are not able to get into a position like that where they can spend 1 month or so contributing for free. But if you can, I think that's actually a very reasonable way to join a project like that. I think it's more meritocratic than just the normal recruiting process. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, very interesting, and not necessarily fully in conflict with what Paul said. Not sure if you want to.
I think it's two sides of the same sword. People are more willing to work for free for something that they like.
Totally.
If it is with a community that they like, even more. Right? So you could join it now because it is your tribe and your community. And actually, well, they even need your skills, so maybe you even work for free, right? And it's your hobby, right? And you start that as an hobby. And it's I think the two sides of the same coin. I do argue that it is a better pitch to do about DAOs saying, come to DAOs, find your community, and join a group of people that you like and identify with, instead of saying, come to DAOs and work for free for a month. But that's just how I pitch it.
Yeah. Then we have the other side of the same coin. This is usually something that's said by Anton, a preeminent member of the crypto and Porto group. Shamefully, is not here today. And he typically says that a crypto DevOps guy or girl, but usually a guy on DevOps, works for free DAOs at the same time because he's just being paid like fulfilling bounties here and there, and no one knows because he's Anna. So by having also the necessity for you to give a little bit of yourself, of your own resources to the association, to the DAO, kind of forces one to filter that. But at the same time, I understand Paul's take of the ability to kind of explore people. And we have here the overlords, the DAO founders, just taking advantage of some.
And by the way, not all DAOs don't pay. Some DAOs you join and you immediately can get paid by a small task that you can.
Yeah.
And that's, by the way, I think the best one.
Yeah. But we'll soon open the floor for the audience for Q&A before our hour is due and our beers are served. But to conclude this area of the conversation, I think we're arriving at the meat of it, and going back to some of the issues that were described in the initial definitions and to this very same problem, and to a specific phrase you said, Paul, that you said regarding to DAOs, that people can choose to decide for themselves, or they can just wait for someone else to decide for them. And tying this also to the democracy decision and to the efficiency of corporations, what we see now in DAOs is the voter fatigue. Everyone is being asked to decide on minor tasks, on day-to-day small issues. Should we move the logo 5 pixels to the left or not, for example? And they are in 20 or 20,000 different discords, and they cannot just follow and go on snapshot and see all the proposals that are going on. And my question to all of you is, how are you experiencing this yourself? And how do you see the future of DAOs in regard to this? And answering the ultimate question of this panel, will DAOs be able to compete with other organizations? Are DAOs the future of organizations? For example, also tying up with Inez, I remember back in university, we're the same college together with Mario, and we're always talking. We're part of multiple DAOs, multiple student associations, doing different work in them, not being paid for sure, but gaining valuable skills in the process.
And making cheats.
Sometimes.
Because that's incentive. That's the belonging, right?
Indeed, or learning so that you meet cheats
Don't
later.
forget that part.
But it's always the discounted opposite sex or discounted future partners.
Of course, yes.
Cash flow present value. But yeah, in this regard, we're always talking, oh, we are all the same. Like in all the associations, it's the same, like different combinations of the same group of people, and it's just 5% of the university. Why are not more people wanting to work together and do cool stuff, building communities? So my question to you is this possible to be overcome, or are we just very optimistic about that?
I think you have like several questions in
Of course.
whatever you said. I think
Something I'm not allowed the audience to do to you.
Exactly. But I think like one thing is that what you mentioned, like will DAOs actually be the future of organizations, and how they compare with corporations? I think like we are comparing two things right now that are in completely different stages of development. If you look at like the first company in the world was the Dutch Indian company or corporation, and it was created I think in the 17th century. And if you compare that company with Apple today, I think you can see that they are, in terms of corporate structures, they are completely different. And basically that shows that when it started, I'm sure that there was like people don't know how to organize things. There was not a CEO, a HR department. There was not all these things that we are now using in our company. So I think like when we are comparing these things in completely different stages of development, I think we are being unfair to DAOs. I think DAOs have been around since the DAO that you mentioned, 2016 or 17. So I think like we are so far away from actually knowing where this is going. But I think it's very, very exciting to actually be part of the construction of it. I think but on the other hand, I think there's also a lot to learn for other forms of organizations, like cooperatives, for example, and associations that you were mentioning, and people that have been trying holacracy or different ways of organizing organizations, like more flat organizations, different decision making, like distributed decision power. I think that's a lot to learn from them. So let's make sure that we don't start from now or from a blank page, because we don't need to. But at the same time, let's not compare things that are, I don't think that are comparable. I think like going to the future, I think we'll see organizations that will require to be a DAO. I think like we were saying, like in DeFi, I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of situations. But I'm sure that when I look at the Tina DAO, we could have, and some people had come to us and say like, you could have done this outside the DAO. In part, that's true, but it's not 100% true, because we could not bring the community element that we actually want to do. So I think like we have to see where these things are going on one hand, and basically, and then go from there. But making sure that we leave space for us to learn. I think right now, even from a legal standpoint, it's such a mess. We need that clarity, and I think we are building that process. So I think answering part of your question. I think the second question that you mentioned is like how can we make sure to involve more people? And I think like to do that, we have the onboarding needs to be different, easier, and better. Right now, if you want to like really onboard into a DAO, you have to have a wallet, and those things are not necessarily hard to create or have, but they are also not easy. A lot of things we have created a number of artificial barriers that don't need to be there, just because we don't necessarily care about user experience. So I think like we need to be better at doing the onboarding, and then like what we were mentioning about contributing to the DAO. I think we need to make sure, because I think we talked about people not being paid and working for free, but I think sometimes like even if I want to work for free for a DAO, sometimes that's not easy, because there's like no way of me like understanding what's happening. And then I think the tools that we have right now are another barrier. Discord doesn't work, but then you have Discourse for some organizations, you have Telegram, and then you have, like, it's impossible for you to actually follow everything. And if you want to really contribute to a DAO, you need to be in one or two, not more than that. Otherwise, I don't think that's possible. Yeah, so basically, I think, like, these are the things that we need to make sure to make it to be possible for us to onboard more people into DAOs.
Self-confidence.
You wanna go?
You can go.
Yeah, so basically I have like three thoughts on that question. Again, like this is something that I think about because I'm basically making a career bet myself, right, in working in this place. And so before jumping full-time or jumping in with most of my attention into it, I have to consider, like, from first principles, what were like the outcomes of this, right? And so my first thought is that DAOs are probably not the best way to manage teams, and that centralized groups or centralized teams work more efficiently there. And I think that's fine, at least in current form. This is my view. Lido is a DAO. I'm part of other groups and stuff like that. And I think it's probably not the most efficient way versus a traditional startup or company. However, there's one interesting trend that I've been tracking a lot recently, which is basically DAOs becoming more financing vehicles for different centralized teams, rather than them actually being the ones managing the teams themselves. So for example, most of the DAOs that we've spoken about here, so Uniswap, Aave, Lido, and many others, Balancer, many others, are now slowly moving into a space where they have centralized teams that might have spun off from the core team at that DAO. For example, Aave has now BGD Labs, who is a team of developers that contributes to the Aave protocol. Lido has multiple teams that build Lido on X, so Lido on different chains outside of Ethereum. Balancer has, for example, Orb Collective, which is also a centralized team that's spun off from the DAO itself, that's now financed by the DAO, but provides basically services to the DAO. And I think that's a much better model, where the decision for the stakeholders or the voters in that DAO is just to finance that team and to define the KPIs for them, and actually the areas of actuation for them as well. And then the way they manage internally is up to them, but it's in a centralized way with a leader and with clear deliverables and OKRs to deliver on. So that's one of the trends that I'm bullish on, and I think that will happen more and will have success. This basically removes a lot of the need for a lot of the votes that go on there. So instead of actually having to vote on each head of department or each head of core unit or whatever you want to call it in a DAO, you can just finance a centralized team and then they do, for example, integrations for this protocol. Another team can just do treasury management for this protocol. And then they manage themselves as a traditional startup or company or even a consulting company would, and then provide services to the DAO that way. I think that's one of the trends that I think can happen in DAOs, and that can be helpful. And that's more the DAO, and the voting on the DAO becomes more of a capital allocator rather than the actual management of day-to-day operations of different people working there. And then the third thing is that I was actually discussing like from first principles, do we believe in DAOs or do we do not believe in DAOs, with a friend of mine that works in this place as well in Lisbon that knows more about DeFi than me. And he was actually not believing in DAOs long term, and I am believing in DAOs long term. And the main thing there is that I think that we can be bullish on DAOs long term as a way to organize work and to organize people, even if we don't really like the way they're structured now, right? And coming back to Inês' point, initially, it's that now it's basically like a chaotic zone where a lot of different things are being experimented on, and that's perfect, right? Even if most ways of organizing DAOs fail, that's totally fine, because we just need one or two things to be discovered inside of that chaos to then become the main way that we do things. And so even if I don't really like the way most DAOs are organized now in terms of managing people and delivering results, I think that has very little bearing on my long-term view on DAOs, because we don't really have to bet on the current status of them. We can just think that amongst this chaos and the experimentation, something will emerge that will be defining a new paradigm for work. So that's kind of my view at the moment.
For that, Paulo, give us the summary.
I was trying to make it. This event happened because there was a previous event in Lisbon where people were talking about DAOs. And the panelists on that event, look at Mari's face. The panelists on that event were a bit pessimistic about DAOs. And I complained about it. Because, again, we're judging a baby idea that right now is a DAO against a super mature idea that right now is a corporation. So it is not fair at all. And being skeptic about DAOs is basically stabbing the baby and killing the baby. So we should be optimistic about DAOs, or about at least the potential of DAOs, because otherwise it's unfair. And it's normal that the baby idea that the DAO is right now is not good for a lot of things. A baby cannot do shit, right? Actually, can do shit, but not shit. So maybe right now, DAOs are only good for one type of use, right? We cannot just like, oh, I want to do a startup, I'm going to do a DAO. No, you want to do a startup, do a startup. Don't do a DAO. Startups that are centralized, hierarchical, VC-backed are much more efficient at being a startup, creating something in the world than a DAO that manages itself in a type of way. There are some things where I think DAOs are good for that corporations could never solve. How to manage AI, how to solve climate change, those kind of things. Global things that require coordination challenges that we never were able to figure out with corporations or governments or nuclear weapons. And so right now, DAOs are probably only good for one type of thing, to solve one type of problems in the world, and those are the ones that require massive amounts of global coordination. And in our DAO, the DAO that I'm creating and doing research on DAOs, we've launched a poll to a bunch of people in the space asking what are the challenges on DAOs right now. And we have a top 5 of challenges, so most people say that onboarding on DAOs is the most challenging thing right now. So it's no surprise that everybody complains about onboarding on DAOs, like Initials just described. Then compensation. There's no clear expectations if I'm going to get paid, how much should I work, is my work needed or not, yada, yada, yada. There's nothing around that. And the voter apathy and voter turnout is like the 5th thing. And I do think
No one cares about government.
I think it's the same reason why people don't vote on normal elections, right? We have abstention in Portugal, like, I don't know how much now, I mean, but
40-70%.
it's not going down. And there's a reason why it's not going down, right? So it's the same thing. If people don't feel they're being heard, they will not vote. If people don't feel that their voice will not lead to change, they will not vote. If DAOs are doing proposals that are just governance theater, people will not vote. That's what happens. And so voter apathy is actually a consequence of a much larger problem, which is groups of people playing the governance theater, pretending that everybody has a say, but actually only a few powerful ones control everything. That's actually the main problem. And Carlos, sorry, almost. Carlos' point of there are some things that work better centralized than decentralized. Now a bunch of people are talking about sub-DAOs, which would be teams inside DAOs, and now sub-DAOs will be managed. We did a research project about that in RNDAO. We published a report about that you can read in rndao.mirror.xyz. And sub-DAOs still have a lot of challenges. And just the way that you organize a DAO into multiple units and multiple teams and how they govern themselves and all that, that's still not resolved at all. People have tried a bunch of different ways, and they're still trying to find a good way for their use cases and in general. So that's still not solved at all. But the landscape of the unknown unknowns of how should we govern ourselves in a better way is so big that maybe somewhere in that huge landscape, there will be a solution if we try enough to look for it, and if we experiment enough to figure out if it works or not, and if we don't put the baby. So that's it.
Super cool. Love the way the light is kind of blinding you. Yes. Also makes you more beautiful, all of you.
I tried to move it backwards.
And it also makes you uncomfortable. Believe like DAOs are making everyone uncomfortable in this room. So just before we go, I hope there are beer in front.
Let's see.
Just before we go to the payment that the DeNites DAO is offering us in return for our nice services of just showing up. Dear audience, any questions we have space for a couple, at least. Very sharp and succinct, please. Have some, yeah, we'll go and see. Just Mario doesn't get to speak.
Is it?
He was before.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the panel for being here. My question is, you all talk about organizations and communities, why not companies, decentralized autonomous companies, with rules and with the same model, the same flow as a community, who are voting and who are ruling the company. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Maybe it is a matter of clarification that power or
And actually, the question is relevant in the sense that Vitalik wrote a blog post in 2014.
So the company is for purpose, is for profit,
Right, Ben?
and not for community pleasure or for giving the drive of being part of something.
but you can have power or profit.
Yeah.
But this confusion is actually super important to talk about, because the term DAO was invented when Vitalik published the blog post that actually was called DAOs/DACs, the future of all, and it was decentralized autonomous organizations, decentralized autonomous corporations. And since he launched the idea in this way, he fucked up everything, because people were like, oh, the same thing, just like DAOs. Then the DAO term won because the DAO was created and stuff. We started to call the DAOs to everything.
Yeah.
Yesterday, he launched another article that now says DAOs are not corporations. In the title. So now he's been clarifying years later, after all this mess.
Just because of this event today.
Just because he knew we were going to be talking about
That
that.
was my question. I have one.
Yeah.
I'm going to question you.
And so, I mean, not that Vitalik knows everything and decides everything about the space, but it's Vitalik, right? And he invented the original terms, confounded in that way, meshed together in that way, and now I think he clarified it that DAOs are not corporations. Still, my answer to your question is corporations are super efficient at solving one type of problems in the world. DAOs are meant to solve some other problems.
Just, I didn't want to shun Mario so
No.
aggressively before. You really want to speak, or because just you were the first one.
I do. I have
No,
relevant question, but Paulo, please.
I have a lot.
Yeah, just one.
So around I was very much interested around the topic of participation of spirit. So what do you use? Like, I think I was in a talk last week in East Berlin, and there was very similar problems. So how do you make sure that people are contributing? That is not the guy with the loudest voice that actually gets all the scene. And so wondering about the tools you use or practices, how do you steer the design behavior from the right tools?
$1 million question, I'll say.
No, so it's actually pretty simple.
Says the designer.
No, I actually, well, I don't know. No, I also teach a workshop for onboarding people into Web3, specifically designers, because it's people I care about. Sorry.
I just said that because designers make what's complex simple effortlessly, so it was a compliment.
But in the workshop yesterday, I did a workshop yesterday about this, onboarding people into Web3, and I demonstrated a tool that's called Coordinate that basically works in the following way, which is, let's imagine that the four of us are part of a team, and we did something that produced value in the world, and we got paid for it, right? Now we got paid $1,000. How do we split it amongst ourselves, right? So the way Coordinate works is that I go to Coordinate and I say, okay, I have the $1,000, and I distribute between Hugo, Inês, and Carvas, but I don't give it to myself. So I say 300 for Hugo, 300 for Inês, 400 for Carvas. And then they all do the same, but they don't do it for themselves. And in the end, there's a distribution of money that, and I've tried to break this a bunch of times, by the way. The distribution of money that comes out of this process is the most fair thing that I've ever seen in how you compensate the group of people that work in the project together, and now you have to decide how much each person did and how much each person should get paid, because almost never it's equal split, right? It's always a bit different. And this can work for people that did 90% of the work and people that did 1% of the work. The only way this doesn't work is if some of us doesn't participate in distributing the allocations. So if we all participate, I think it's totally fair. It's the most fair thing that I've ever seen.
You're trusting everyone details.
No corruption.
And no quid pro quos, like for example, you give me all your tokens, and you give all the tokens, they fund themselves, right? That could happen as well.
It is on chain, so
Right now it's not on chain.
what's the name again?
Coordinate.
What?
The logo is a ape. Coordinate ape. To coordinate apes that we are.
We have one final question from the audience.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the great talk. It's really nice to see so many people here. And maybe this is a question or a realization that I had while you were talking about the other guy, sorry, about decentralized cooperation with businesses. Isn't the concept of a DAO and decentralized cooperation very similar to the co-op form? You know what co-op is, right? So basically every employee is also a member of the company.
Ines was
I
talking
mentioned
about
that,
that.
Yeah, right. So wouldn't that be also implementable for a corporation to kind of manage these systems? Would that be intelligent to do, or would that be very efficient?
That's part of the debates that are happening on the DAO space.
Yeah, I think like we definitely have to learn from folks like how they work and what works well. I think DAOs bring a layer of complexity because like while in cooperatives usually people can see each other, they are like somehow they meet and they are close together, and it's usually very well defined what needs to be done. So for example, I come from a town that has a co-op that manages our electricity. So I don't live there anymore, but my parents don't buy electricity to EDP or one of the other companies, it buys to this cooperative. Sorry? Exactly. So basically, what means is like these people come together because in a time where there was like no cables and the infrastructure was not there, and they came together to build this thing, and now it's still there. You are like one of the last ones. So, but this work, I think we can learn a lot from them. But I think DAOs, because of the nature of what we are trying to do, are a little bit more complex. But still, I think we can learn a lot from that. And I think cooperatives can also learn from DAOs and can also import some of the tools that are being developed for DAOs in their processes.
I think there's a distinction that's worth making. There is in the traditional corporate world practices of self-management, like holacracy, sociocracy, all that. But it's very rare that they are implemented in a group of people where they all own the thing. The difference with DAO is that everybody owns the organization. And people act very differently if they're an employee or if they're the owner of the thing, right? As you can imagine.
That's the idea.
That's the hope, at least. And so that kind of undermines the whole, not all, but a lot of the knowledge of self-management methodologies like sociocracy and holacracy and all that, because those methodologies have not really been implemented successfully in organizations where everybody is the owner. No, there's still one owner, and then people make decisions in a self-managed way. That's okay. And they may be more efficient, there could be debate about that, blah, blah, blah. But it's still worth to try, and a lot of companies do that. But the ownership is not distributed. Cool thing about DAOs, which makes them more similar to cooperatives, where actually everybody owns the thing, right? Is that the ownership aspect is there. Now, what's the advantage of DAOs over cooperatives? Is that if you have the rules in a smart contract, nobody can steal away the money, which happens quite a bit in cooperatives.
Yeah, can I add something?
Of course.
To that? Yes. A couple of thoughts on that. I think it's a relevant question. I think that, first of all, back to your point where you mentioned that in a cooperative, everyone owns the equity, let's call that, or the ownership of that organization. and you mentioned specifically everyone that works there owns it, right? In a DAO, not all people that work there have to own a piece of the DAO, right? So it's I think of a DAO like as a much more bare bones instrument that you can shape in different ways. So it can be that everyone that works for a DAO owns a piece of the DAO, but it can also be that it isn't like that. So people can work for a DAO, just get paid in dollars or whatever else, and not
The
actually.
opposite, right? You can have, you can own part of the DAO and not work there.
Absolutely. So it's a much more malleable instrument that you can just shape that way, but also in many other ways. And then I think that you're mentioning like why isn't like a DAO cooperative or vice versa. I think there are specific technical considerations for that, where, for example, a DAO, it's a non-chain organization, right? It's something that's built on a blockchain and that's governed on the blockchain. And at the moment, and one of the biggest challenges and areas of opportunity that I see in crypto is how do you have or represent ownership of real world assets on chain. And that's something that today is actually not done in a clean way. And so if you wanted to build that organization to interact with the real world, let's call that, and have, for example, a building, have a factory, something like that, the best way would definitely not be a DAO, right? But also if you wanted to manage a product on chain, like I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, a smart contract for a financial infrastructure product or anything like that, the way to do that would also not be a cooperative, right? It would be a DAO that had actually actual ownership rights over that contract or over some tokens that have governance rights over that contract. And so it's just that it's dependent on what you want to build, but also that a DAO, I think it's a much more malleable instrument that you can shape in different ways as well. So those are like the 2 points there.
Definitely. And many jurisdictions are fighting for that transition and for the integration of the both worlds.
Yeah.
And in Lisbon, there's, if anyone here doesn't know about it and likes this legal aspect of DAOs, just Google Lisbon DAO Observatory for nice work on the topic. And with this being said, just wanted to thank our panelists and the audience for the questions, and pass the ball to Mario to conclude the event and show us the way.
Okay, so the big question is,
But they
all of
cannot,
you.
they cannot answer.
Okay, yeah, so a question for the room, right? So all of you mentioned like working for free in DAO, one of the main problems. Carlos also mentioned the recruitment process. I don't want to shield my project, but my question for you is, doesn't bounties and bounty tooling solve that in a way?
Yeah, for me,
No, come on.
yeah, in my opinion, bounties are actually one of the best tools to do onboarding that way, right? Because there's much less commitment from an organization to onboard a person full time, and you can just test different kinds of contributors on smaller tasks that have a beginning and an end instead of an actual contributor that's there full time or spending a percentage of their time on a continuous basis. So I think it's definitely one of the biggest tools. Lego doesn't really have a bounty program yet, maybe, but has a different type of tool as well, which is called a grant program, where people can. It's basically it's a similar concept, but the direction of information is the opposite, right? In a bounty, the DAO puts out what they want to see done, and in a grant program, the person gives to the DAO a proposal to actually build or do something. So it's a similar concept, but it works in a different way. I think those two are awesome tools to onboard contributors as well.
If I answer the question, that's going to be right. Yes.
That's what we want.
Come on, come on.
No, I think bounties are kind of a cancer in DAOs right now, because especially if you use it for onboarding, because it sets up the tone of the relationship as a transactional relationship. You come into this family, you do a task, you get paid, that's it. Just like in the old days, wanted, dead or alive, bounty, 10,000. You can go ahead and kill him and bring his head, you get the money. I don't think bounties are a humane way to work. And they should be replaced by something better.
I think it
That's
really.
what they call
That's what they're called bounties, exactly. And it's in the name, it's no surprise for anyone. We're just like brushing over the fact, what do you mean by bounties? Like bounties? Yeah, bounties, yes.
But for example, I'm working with this organization, Smart Contract Research Forum. It's not a DAO, but we are using bounties to onboard, not onboard in the sense that you are mentioning in terms of like having people to do jobs, but we want to onboard researchers into Web3 by asking, basically what we are saying, like we are paying them to do things that like summaries of Web3 research,
Small
for
tasks.
example, small tasks. But small tasks that there's value for the people that are doing them, and also value for us, of course. But the bounty is a way for them to actually understand more about like what's happening in Web3 space. So I think in that case, I think that's I think it's a little bit different from what you were mentioning, but it is a little bit different.
No, no,
We'll
no,
talk about
no,
it.
it's just like that.
But because we don't need the people. We don't need people to do that work. Actually, we just like we want to onboard
Giving them
them.
money for free, calling it bounties,
Bounties.
just for them to come in.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
It's
So-
like a carrot saying,
Exactly.
you'll get $50 if you do this thing. Please come in and get $50. Just give people $50.
No, but because I think like there's a lot of
Just
value
give
in
people
learning
$50.
about Web3.
Just give people $50.
Can I just add something else? So I think that
Like, you'll just have to face the wrath of the people when
it's super quick, just to cap it up. I think that what you mentioned is perfectly fine to doing it now. I think it's much better than to just give it $50, right? Because you're actually in the process of doing work for Athena, and in the process of actually producing a small piece or whatever, they'll get a lot more context on the organization, how people work. So even for recruiting purposes, I think it's fine. Even if it's work that's not really useful for you guys, like you mentioned. But I think that the next step and the way that this should actually be done in a larger scope is to actually have useful tasks being done instead of theater tasks, which are useful, like I mentioned to you. But I think that the way to scale bounties is to actually have useful tasks. And I think they're perfectly fine to do. And they don't really, in my opinion, don't really create that relationship that's too transactional, because there actually are tasks in our world and in any company that you guys are part of, where there's actually a beginning and an end of that task. It's literally the definition of a project, right? So a task that has a beginning, an end, and then a deliverable. And I think it's perfectly fine to use a bounty. And even like the word that you use, like a family, right? I don't really see a DAO like a family, like the analogy that you use, because obviously I'm more on the side that the DAOs that I'm part of have products, have revenues, and have all of that. And I think it's perfectly fine to onboard people, or even not to onboard, but just to tap into an external network of contributors that can do useful work via bounties, and that may even work better for their lifestyle, right? People can opt in DeFi to just do bounties for different protocols and have no strings attached to each one or to any of them, and just live that different lifestyle and work more as freelancers. And I think that's a perfectly fine choice for many people. And so I think that both like onboarding in a traditional way as a full-time contributor, or using bounties or using grants, I think those are all perfectly fine tools. So I kind of disagree with your view, but yeah, that's kind of the way I see it.
Just clarify one thing.
Yeah,
I disagree with making bounties the onboarding mechanism.
yeah, they don't have to be the only one, right?
They shouldn't be the onboarding mechanism, because it's the same as saying, hey, I want to meet you, and I'll pay you $50 for you to meet me. Huh? Or, hey, come on a date with me, and I'll pay $50 for you to come on a date with me. It's not the right moment to do a transactional.
How's that like the actual analogy, right? Because we're actually saying that will play for work, right? Not really for that or to meet anyone. It's actually playing for work. So I think it's
No, I
kind of breaks down there.
was talking about the example that DeNites gave about the theater.
But I think like I think the difference, like we are not necessarily the goal of this is not to onboard people into a DAO. It's to onboard people into Web3, into like the space, and that's what we are doing.
Just give them money. PayPal used to onboard people into PayPal. Just give them money. Create a PayPal account, get $10. That's it. That's how it works. If it is a marketing tactic to attract people, just give people money.
it's good to have this kind of divergences. I
Yes.
suggest that the people who agree with Paulo drink their beers with the right hand.
We have a real vote of beers.
That's why we can continue the conversation.
Yeah, so wrapping this up, I'm sure you're all thirsty and your stomachs are rumbling. So yeah, just some final notes. Just wanted to thank all of the speakers here. I think that they did a fantastic job, but it's not my job to actually decide that. So if you want to give some feedback at the end, please do, and we encourage that. So important stuff. kiosk set.
Yes, kiosk 3 is right next to
Okay,
it.
so kiosk 3 is right there. So you can leave by this door and just turn left. That's the only thing you need to know. If you don't have a bracelet, then you should catch one with Tomasz, because otherwise you won't be able to get your drinks. And also, as a reminder, so physical crypto hub here, if you want to.
He's asking for if the food can get done.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Great timing, right?
And yeah, that's it. Thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed this.
If you can just talk about a little bit about the idea of the crypto that we have both in our teams. If anyone wants to have more news on the next week, because we're gonna have news to share. And if you have interest, just tell us. We have like a little form. You just have to sign it, and we're gonna send you the news next week. Okay? So talk with us.
Exactly.
Just that.
Exactly that. Thank you. You're very simple. But yeah, that's it. So let's drink up and have some food. Right. Thank you all for coming.